This is the April edition of the Lockdown Your Learning series from ICT Skillnet from Technology Ireland. And just a reminder that these sessions are recorded and that facilitates later distribution on the YouTube channel of ICT Skillnet, and that's accessible from ictskillnet.ie. Also, there are a number of courses upcoming for those wishing to upskill, cross-skill, or even start a career in ICT. There are a number of cybersecurity courses in particular. There's everything from the Certified Cyber Risk Specialist course to Virtual Capture the Flag and a Masters of Science in Cybersecurity. So please do check those out. But for anyone who is perhaps looking to get a broader view, there's one course in particular on emerging digital technologies that I can recommend, the Certificate in Emerging Digital Technologies, which commences on the 25th of the 5th this year. So it gives a good grounding in everything from AI to ML and blockchain and those kinds of things. But more importantly, it also gives an outline of their impact on business technology. So please do check those out. So today we're talking about cybersecurity, and we have a host of cybersecurity experts, and we're going to have a particular focus on education in cybersecurity as well. So more than a year into the global pandemic, and the long-term effects of remote working are only just becoming apparent. And what we're also trying to have a look at is how cyber threats have emerged and how threat actors have adapted during this time and changed their methodologies. And also, as the vaccines roll out, and obviously there's changing news on that every single day, what are the likely changes that are going to come from that? And again, how is that going to impact and how can they be handled? So just a reminder then that my name is Paul Hearns. I'm a journalist and commentator, and I've been hosting the Lockdown Your Learning series since about this time last year. So we've got a good range of topics covered. So just to introduce our panel, we have Brian Honan, CEO and Principal Consultant with BH Consulting. Brian is a highly experienced information security professional, and he has a global reputation. Over his career, he has managed and delivered information security projects and services to organizations of all sizes, from SMEs to large companies and multinationals. He's also worked extensively with government departments and agencies internationally. So welcome, Brian. We're also joined by Matthew Gorge, CEO of VigiTrust. And Matthew is a global data security, information governance, and compliance subject matter expert with more than 20 years experience. He's CEO and founder of VigiTrust, and which provides integrated risk management and software as a service solutions to clients in 120 countries, from hospitality and retail through to higher education, government, and healthcare. Paul C. Dwyer is CEO of Cyber Risk International, and Paul is recognized as one of the world's foremost cybersecurity experts and also in risk and privacy. He is CEO of Cyber Risk International and specializes in corporate cyber defense, active in the cyber risk awareness movement as well, I suppose, and has done a lot to raise awareness around cybersecurity internationally. Michael Conway is director of Renaissance Contingency Services, and Michael is an IT veteran and co-founder of the security distributor and service provider Renaissance. He's an expert in business continuity and disaster recovery, and is an author and commentator in the area. We're also joined by Carmel Summers of ICT Skillnet, and Carmel is an organizational psychologist and is with Technology Ireland ICT Skillnet's human capital strategist, and she supports organizations in Ireland developing and implementing their future of work strategies. And Carmel has a long history in the IT industry, and having come through IBM in particular, and she's going to give us a context in terms of skills development. So if I could ask all of our panelists to turn on their cameras now and join me. Just in terms of our audience today then, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A function. So please feel free to use that. We're looking for not just questions, but comments, insights, and reaction as well. So please do feel free to use that. There is also the raise hand function. So if you wish to come on and make a point directly or speak to the panelists, you can raise your hand, and our producer Sarah will come to you and allow you to open your mic. So we have a good number in the audience, and there's more joining us already. So please do feel free to jump in. We really want this to be as interactive a session as possible. So what I'm going to ask our panelists to do first is just a little round robin to see their current kind of insights and what's happening in their respective areas of focus, because we have quite a diverse representation here today, and we'll want to use it to the full. So maybe Brian, if I could come to you first and just see what have you seen most recently? What have you seen evolving in the sort of the year of the pandemic, and what maybe have you seen particularly in terms of how some of the old reliables may have adapted, or brand new threats emerged?
I suppose what we've seen is cyber criminals evolving to cope with the global pandemic, much similar to how businesses have evolved to cope with the pandemic. This time last year, everybody was rushing around trying to figure out, how do I keep my business going? How do I migrate online? How do I get systems move from on-premise maybe into the cloud so that I can support that? How do I get devices and machines out to staff? Or maybe how do we allow staff to use their own personal devices to access our systems? So I think in many ways, we have to be thankful for COVID-19 to be probably the best known digital transformation officer in many companies around Ireland and around the world. But I think, unfortunately, in that rush to survive and to keep the business running, which of course is a key factor in every business, a lot of the cybersecurity measures have probably been overlooked, or maybe have been put on the sideline with the promise to come back and look at them again in more detail. So we've seen an increase in companies being breached by having poor remote access systems in place. Many of these may have been designed initially to cope with a small number of mobile workers out for sales or whatever, out and about, but not to cope with the whole company trying to come in together, and have been rushed to scale up. Or solutions have been put in place, like we've seen breaches occur where people have put in remote desktop control solutions to allow staff from their home PCs remotely access their company computer, but using weak passwords, criminals will be able to access the company computer and then get in from there. And then we've seen people move to the cloud. I think again, relying on staff to use secure passwords and not to reuse passwords from other websites. But unfortunately, over time and time again, we see that. And then criminals have also used the pandemic as a theme to launch phishing attacks or social engineering attacks against staff. So using emails pretending to be from the HR department about COVID-19 measures, click here to get details, etc., and phishing staff from. But I'm sure there's similar experiences from everybody else in the panel that we can share, and I don't want to hog the whole lot at the very beginning, but they're just some.
Certainly, that's a good kind of roundup. Certainly. So, Matthew, if I could come to you next, the sort of range of clients that you've got across kind of public and private sector, did you see any particular area or sort of sector that was maybe targeted more than others during this period?
Yeah, so I think we saw specifically the health industry being targeted, and that was to be expected because not only are they part, generally speaking, of the critical infrastructure, but they're really critical at the moment. So criminals see that as a big opportunity. They're kind of thinking, well, they're busy doing something else right now, so they're an easy target. We've seen actually a lot of attacks on the transportation industry, which even though there's less and less traffic, The systems are still open to attacks, and I think that criminals are taking their time to plant the seeds for big attacks, and maybe looking at attacks that they will launch in once the traffic starts taking up again. We've obviously seen, like Brian was saying, the risk surface growing exponentially. And that's across the industry, that we're seeing that some companies went from having 10 to 20% of their workforce being remote to overnight 90 to 100%, and not being prepared for that as well. So the criminals are exploiting that. And then now what we're seeing employers struggling with reorganizing the offices from a physical security space and a logical security space, and also having to become the agents or the police for who's vaccinated and who's not, and they're typically not prepared for that. They don't necessarily want to have your health information, and those that actually are saying no, I want to have that information are probably slightly misinformed because they're not necessarily ready. So I think we're going to see a lot of movement on that front.
That's a very interesting point about the health information that it's probably not something that many have considered. Paul, if I could come to you next, what's your sort of general view?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably echo what the guys have said. I mean, a part of it is, if you think of back to that first lockdown when everybody was had those short-term goals of wanting to get up and running from, getting all their employees working from home, just being able to survive and get through, and everything was new and scary for everybody. There's short-term goals, but you've longer-term imperatives, which is that you have to meet regulations, you have to be able to do things properly. So in other words, everybody adopted shadow IT and skipped a lot of the policies and good controls they had in place and the normal assurances. And effectively, the inherent cyber risk of every business in the world changed because of COVID. Therefore, what controls should be in place and the maturity level of those also should change, but they haven't in many, many cases because they haven't really looked at that. So therefore, the residual risk is an unknown. And if you're not measuring something, you can't manage it. And I think that's the challenge for a lot of businesses now. And to Matthew's point in relation to health data, even, the burden upon businesses to just operate through this, never mind become another state operative to try and control people and what they can and can't do and so on. That can't be discounted in any way. That's huge and hugely significant psychologically wise, on people working from home, being distracted, which is a lot of the reason why these cyber criminals and cyber threat actors are being successful, because there's people distracted. I mean, 90% of the data home workers are using, recent survey said, was confidential. Do they have even a shredder? Do they have, are they in a shared work environment? Can people see their screens? This is basic stuff we're talking about, guys, that makes a massive difference, as well as the high-end controls, obviously, as well. But things have definitely changed. And therefore, the response, the controls, the architecture, everything has to change to deal with the new normal we're in today and the new normal we'll be in tomorrow.
Very good, and that's a point I think we'll come back to, because the recent government paper around rural regeneration has co-working spaces as a key part of it. So again, how that might be handled and how policies can be applied to it. But Michael, if I could come to you, your view in particular is interesting, given that as a distributor of cybersecurity products, you're dealing with a lot of people who are on the front line, and they're kind of demands coming back as well in terms of what they're being asked for, what they're being asked to do. So what's your view, and where have you seen the kind of key areas of either demand or shortfall?
And thanks, Paul, for the. It's very interesting following on what all of the others have mentioned and talked about, because I guess our business is a distribution business, so we don't sell to anybody here. We don't sell to any, but we see an awful lot of the demand for all sorts of different aspects of cybersecurity compliance technologies, and. It's interesting. It's been I suppose, I guess the first thing is business has been decent over the last while, but not extraordinary. So we haven't actually seen a massive boom in terms of people going out to buy a whole bunch of protections. And I think to the point that the Paul, Matthew and Brian brought out is a lot of people have gone off and kept the show going, kept everything alive. And Paul's comment there about short-term goal, longer-term imperative, I think that actually hits the spot. You also mentioned the word architecture, and I think that hits the spot as well. I think the architecture for the way that we need to work in the future is not the architecture that it was 24 months ago and 18 months ago and 12 months ago. And the architecture that people have now is not the architecture that they need in many cases. It's an evolved, sorted out I suppose a derivation slightly of the architecture they had 12 months ago. It's not where they need to be. So I think there's a real challenge for organizations and people out there in terms of actually retrofitting, going back now and actually developing what they need to do. Because 12 months ago, we all sat in our homes and everything else, and we thought, well, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months, whatever the hell, we'll be out of this. We're a long way out. Now we're if I hear another announcement or about vaccine, blah blah blah, I've had enough. This is life. This is normality. And you talk about the paper the government have there. They have a remote working policy document as well. And people, look, we're going to end up in a hybrid working environment. That's what it's going to be. We can like it, we can not like it. Some people will be 100% office, some people will be 100% at home, but ultimately be hybrid. People need to revise and review their architecture, and that's not just technical. It's also people, because sticking somebody out and saying, listen, do you know what, you go home, you do your thing, I'm going to give you loads of confidential data, you're on your own, and look after you. I don't have somebody beside me to say, does this email look funny? Does it look strange? I've lost that sort of awareness. So there's the skills, there's an awareness, there's a whole other bunch of aspects, not just throwing technology at it. That's my 30 seconds.
Very good. Thank you. Well, Carmel, coming to you from ICT Skillnet's perspective in terms of trying to provide educational resources in this environment. Have you seen a change in demand that sort of reflects those experiences, or are you kind of thinking, or are you also perhaps thinking a little bit longer term to maybe meet needs that might emerge in the next sort of 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, good question, actually, Paul. We're not seeing massive need, and I think kind of back to Michael's thing, like we're seeing an ongoing need, but nothing to the degree that we would have expected to see it, given the scenario of people moving to virtual work. And I suppose something that really struck me is that last year ISC2 did a survey that said that up to 50% of cybersecurity professionals were moved to do other IT type work in order to get organizations working virtually and to maintain them working virtually. And I'm not sure that has, completely stopped. So I think that we should be seeing more, and we certainly, I think, should be seeing more given the nature of virtual working. And, and we are certainly trying to address that from a skills perspective, because, you can look at skills gaps, but you also, as you look at skills shortages, which is we don't have enough people to do cybersecurity roles, but you also need to look at the skills gaps. And I think that it's even more important to look at the skills gaps now, given this virtual work. And as Michael said, when you don't have somebody, if an email comes in now, I have to make a decision on it. It's not that I can say, did you get that email? Does that look funny? Does that look, so yeah. And I think that there's a lot of work going on both with ICT Skillnet and with a lot of other organizations to actually address skills gaps and skills needs.
Well, Paul, I'll come to you actually, because one of the points you made there, I think, is actually very important in terms of distraction at home. So even highly skilled and knowledge-based workers who were used to working from home often did so on the basis of there were certain tasks or perhaps cycles in their monthly processes that would lend themselves to being at home. Maybe writing time, reading time, where they had to assimilate a lot of information. So sometimes even experienced home workers may not have done the entirety of their tasks from home because there were things that suited the office and things that suited at home. So with the level of distraction that is also there, have threats necessarily needed to emerge to be successful, or is it just a case of hammering in the old ones and you have a higher success rate?
It's probably a little bit of both, Paul, to be honest, because you've got that real factor, which is that people are distracted and overwhelmed at home. There's a huge level of anxiety on people, whether they realize it or not. So they're maybe not on their A game, right, when they're working from home. Marry that in with this piece about like they're doing work that they don't normally do from home as well. Marry that in with no colleagues, no support mechanism, no culture, no feeling of I'm in my persona of work Paul, as opposed to home Paul or whatever, that kind of thing. So it makes it easier for those even low-level cyber criminals to be effective with the same kind of vectors like phishing emails. And they're going to be much more effective because they've got easier ways of doing it, and they've got a distracted target audience. And then you've got that whole thing of lighting a fire in the front garden while the guy comes in the back door, whatever, that whole technique that's going on as well. But it is that short-term, long-term vision. And that short-term, long-term vision is something very real in the cyber threat actor community. There will be guys who want a quick win. And then there's guys that Matthew alluded to who are playing the long game. And those guys are taking their time and they're infiltrating the infrastructure of major financial organizations and critical national infrastructure and transportation links and everything else like that. And we won't see the results of that for maybe 6, 9, 12 months of what they've been able to do and bed themselves in and live in that sort of symbiotic way on the systems and not be detected and so on, because they're ingraining themselves in. And that's why I often refer to it as a C-19 cyberstorm that's coming, because we are going to pay a big price from this, especially as Carmel said. A lot of the people who are fighting the good fight are off building out PCs and spinning up, vanilla installs and all that kind of stuff. And they're not doing what they should be doing. We're at our most vulnerable at the moment. We're most dependent on this digital ecosystem. Yet all these people are being used in digital transformation projects, and it's forget about the rules. The new rules are there are no rules. There's going to be a price to be paid for this.
Indeed. Well, Matthew, do you want to come in on that and maybe elaborate a little bit? Because I think that's not necessarily something that's probably in the general consciousness of people laying foundations now for later, more sophisticated attacks. So do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'd agree with what Paul was saying, that there's a number of criminals that are taking their time and playing the long game. And that is not necessarily being looked after. What I will say, though, is that if you're to flip things a little bit around, that one of the things that's happening right now is that because of COVID and because of the recent hacks that we've seen, there's more attention to cyber from the board and the C-suite than there was before. I've always been a great advocate of we need to educate the board, we need to educate the C-suite, and of course we need to do security awareness at all levels, and it needs to be continuous. But I do think that the board realized that the way they were working was changing, right? And so the architecture, as was said before, is changing as well. The risks are changing, and so that has got the attention of the board. So if there's one potentially positive inverted comma thing that came out of the crisis from a cyber perspective, is that we kind of have the immediate attention of the board, but to the earlier point, they're still not necessarily getting the fact that this is not a point in time solution. They have to do it on a regular basis, so the continuous compliance is required. And I often say that security is a journey and not a destination. So you've got like a few pit stops along the way where you can take a respite, and then 10 minutes later, you're out of compliance and you're no longer secure. And right now, the architecture is changing nearly every day. So 1 week, we're told you can go back to the office in 3 weeks' time. So we start preparing. The next week, it's like, no, you can't go back to the office. Then it's like only 50% of people can go to the office. It's very hard with the best will in the world to try and get ready. And so I think that's something that we as an industry need to help boards with, to understand the architecture is changing, the game is changing on a regular basis, and so you have to keep your eye on the ball at all times.
Okay, well, that neatly addresses the question that we had submitted there, which was around what advice do the speakers give to shift the board and C-suite perception around these, that it's not just a technology issue, that there are other issues as well in terms of working practices and everything. So I see you have your hand up there, Paul, but I'll just come to Brian first, and maybe do you want to comment on that in terms of that situation of not just an increased attack surface, but perhaps threat actors making hay at the moment for later sunshine?
Yeah, I think that they're two very valid points. And I think we're all looking at COVID-19, obviously, from a very negative perspective all the time, because it's had such a negative impact on all aspects of our lives, both personal and professional. But I think if you step back and look at COVID-19, this is an opportunity for the cybersecurity professionals to align with the business and maybe promote cybersecurity within the business as not being, no, you can't do that anymore because of security, but yes, we can help you business survive, but this is how we need to do it in a secure way. So it's the opportunity now for us to sit with the board and take this opportunity where, while it's still hectic out there, it is not as hectic as it was 12 months ago. So we're kind of in a lull. And this is the opportunity for us to now present to the board and to the C-suite. Cybersecurity can enable this business to survive and to continue to thrive in the new normal, whatever way that is going to shape. We're not going to have everybody working in the office at the same time like we did 2 years ago. So why don't we now use this time to not only look at our architecture from an IT point of view and systems point of view to support remote workers, office workers, and maybe a hybrid, but also look at the skills that people are going to need in that new working environment. And not just the technical skills of being able to identify a fake email coming in, but also soft skills on how we communicate better as organizations in a remote environment. Like, I'm sure I'm not the only one on this call who is sick of seeing people's faces on the screen and having Zoom calls and team meetings and Google meetings and have about 20 different apps on your phone and your computer to communicate with different people in different ways, and Slack and other things popping up all the time with messages. And it's a very disruptive work environment right now. It's a survivable work environment because it has to be, but I believe it's not sustainable. So we do need to look at the architecture from a systems point of view, and there's going to need to be skills given to not just cybersecurity people, but to the rest of the IT people in order how to support and manage those. But as I said, more importantly, the soft skills on how we communicate remotely, how we interact with each other, how we collaborate better as well. I think one of the things we need to do from a cybersecurity point of view is look at our own skills and how we can manage this new normal. Because if you're in a lockdown, as we are now, how do you do remote investigations, remote forensics, manage an incident when you physically cannot, maybe for health reasons, travel to the area or get on site, or if somebody's home PC has been compromised, how do you get there? How do you assess the risk? How do you determine how critical it is? What tool sets do you have? What training do we have? And I think there's a whole lot of stuff there that we need to look at.
That's a really good point, and I think that's something we'll explore next. But there's an interesting comment there from Annick, where she says that they're not soft skills as opposed to hard skills, but rather human skills, as they are necessary for leadership and success. So
very well put.
A subtle but insightful comment there. So thank you for that. Paul, you had your hand up there just to comment on that as well, just before we go on to the next point.
Sure, absolutely, because I think Brian's hit a really, really strong point here, which is about aligning the cyber strategy and the business strategy, and everything's just been thrown up in the air and all the business strategy is different. So we need to realign. One of the things that we've been working on over the last couple of years, and when all of this started, like we say a couple of years, it's like 18 months, I suppose, was with ICT Skillnet. And we brought that certified cyber risk officer program to the world to teach boards of directors and those reporting to the boards how to understand cyber risk and how to manage it in your organization. And to echo and underpin the points from Matt Matthew and Brian, I think we need to go beyond compliance. We need to go to enablement, enable the business through cybersecurity and risk management, not just compliance. Compliance is always going to be the lowest baseline. We want to find out now how the business operates, how it's digitally transformed, how you're going to go beyond survival and thrive by being able to embrace cyber risk. Cyber risk management is the wrapping around your new version of your business, what's going to protect it and bring it on and make it thrive as it goes through.
Very good. Well, one of the things that we've concentrated a lot in terms of remote working and the sort of the user experience. But if we look at it a little bit more kind of infrastructurally and coming to Brian's point of what happens when perhaps an exposed application is attacked, or something comes in through a website or other exposed surface. What are the challenges you're seeing there that have methods evolved in those sorts of instances? Are there increased attacks in those areas? And as you highlighted, Brian, what have the investigation and dealing with those kinds of attacks been complicated by the remote working situation? So maybe Brian, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, look, they have been. So like we've been involved in helping quite a few organizations recover from breaches. And the big challenge that we've seen with many organizations is that, and to be frank, this is not really a COVID-19 issue, but many organizations still don't have the right cybersecurity skill sets internally. And in particular, when it comes towards dealing with security incidents. I think people have watched too many episodes of CSI Cyber and quickly rush to unplug computers and do this, that, and the other. And we've got an IP address. Quick, let's call the police and kick the door down, and where that goes back to. But we've seen it takes a lot more finesse than that, and your instant response needs to incorporate skills from not just technical but also PR, legal, data protection now as well, because you do have GDPR if you've got personal data involved in the breach, and the technical understanding of how many of the systems have worked. So the way COVID-19 has complicated things is solutions have been put in place as a quick fix, and in many cases some of the IT professionals who have absolutely done their best, but they may not necessarily have had the training in that technology that they just put in place. So you may have had companies, for example, move their on-premise email into a cloud solution. And it's been a quick Google search for cost and pricing, how to migrate, and follow the step-by-step guide and go, thank God that's over. We now have email up and running in the cloud. We're but the people the people looking after that haven't had formalized training or maybe understanding how that cloud works. And we've seen that happen quite a bit where similarly where companies have migrated from being trading in the physical world to trading online and have moved into setting up websites, etc., and other digital channels that they've engage with someone to do it, a web developer, or internally, they've created the website, set things up, but have not taken additional steps, to either understand the risks, the cyber risks associated, but also their legal compliance, data protection, and other risks and business risks that they have there as well. So there's a whole gap and gamut of skills, and as the previous commentator said, human skills and business skills that has to be encompassed in all this before I think the new normal can be normal.
Okay. Well, we have a question there that kind of goes back a little bit towards the staff and the user issue. So we'll deal with that in one moment. And thank you for submitting that. But I'd just like to get some of the other perspectives on that. Michael, say in your perspective in terms of what the service providers that you work with and have their demands changed in terms of the capabilities that they're looking to provide to their clients to reflect this sort of new situation?
I guess if I can just push back a tiny bit, Paul, on some of the things, and it's very interesting. And excuse me. I just got a little cough, but it's nothing else, nothing more serious, I believe. But
Quick, cut them off.
No, I've had one of those little flossy things. Just check them on a daily basis, so I'm good. But just on some of the points there, talking about on board and cyber and the environment that exists, as Brian was just outlining it there. I think I'd slightly different from some of the previous speakers as well. I think board. We talk about board and we talk about board awareness and we talk about board level, but actually, what size organizations are we talking about for board level? Because the SME marketplace in Ireland, like we see what people buy, we see what people demand and what they're looking for. I would take issue to say that there's a lot of board level awareness in a lot of medium-sized organizations. They may know something about it, but they're hoping it'll go away. Yeah, a couple of quick questions I'd sort of throw out there and say, well, listen, and I think I'm going to try and answer this one as well and say, well, listen, are we more or less secure than we were 12 or 15 months ago? I'd argue in many cases less secure. And that's not what we've been seeing with cyber. We've been seeing cyber becoming more and more secure. Now, the threats and the bad guys are making, they're always pushing against that door. But if you go back 12, 15 months ago, the architecture, the environment, we've still lots and lots of organizations out there saying, everything is sort of okay. We're working on home users. We're working on shared internet at home. We're doing things the lack of controls that's in these organizations and in these working environments. As to Paul's point earlier, when he says a lot of confidential information is being worked with in people's homes, and to Brian's point about about the forensics and how you can actually identify things. It's very difficult to do forensics on someone's device when it's their device and your data. That's difficult because that's their device in their maybe not even in their own physical property, but it's their home using somebody else's environment, like their internet connection, to process some data. And so I think there's a lack of. There's a bit of a sort of we'll hope this will be all over soon. And you know what? It won't be over, because I think what we're all agreeing here is this is a hybrid working environment for the future. So people need to put in proper hybrid working technologies and skills and everything else. But just coming to your question, Paul, which was the service providers in terms of what they're providing, I think that they are trying to drive, but there is a resistance from business to say, listen, it's working. We can't go into people's homes, so we can't change stuff. We can't deploy things. It's working. We'll keep it going. And I think that that's going to break. Fundamentally, that will break, because that can't continue on. I mean, it's April now. I have to look at the calendar to see what month it is, because every day seems the same. But it is April now. But when will it all change?
Okay, then that actually brings us nicely back to one of the questions that's been submitted here. It says, with work from home, do you find that there are more businesses conducting cybersecurity awareness programs for all staff, even non-tech? And has it changed much compared to pre-COVID? So again, I think that's something that's possibly wasn't done as much as it could have been before. Has there been a rush to do it now? Or as Michael has said, are people saying it's working, if fragile, don't touch it? So who wants to come in on that one first?
I think you've answered the question yourself, Paul, to be quite honest.
There was a question in that answer, Paul, yeah?
Awareness is still very low. And difficult enough as it was to deliver it while people are in the office, it's by far much more difficult now to do it when people are out of the office. And it requires then business to invest more in cybersecurity, and probably in stuff that they feel wrongly that they won't get any value out of. So it's looking to invest in an online security awareness training platform. But they'd much rather spend money on maybe buying shiny laptops for maybe not the board, Michael, but maybe the CEO or the
well,
CFO.
Put him on the board. But just on that, I think one of the challenges they have is they don't know what's happening in the workplace.
Yes.
The monitoring, there are loads of those technologies which can monitor what you're doing, keystrokes, all that type of stuff. That's Big Brother to a great degree. But there's also, this data leakage stuff. That's not widely deployed. That's the reality. It's not widely deployed. So very difficult for them to train people when they don't see what's happening out there.
Yeah,
Carmel, do you want to? Sorry, just bring Carmel in first, and then we'll come to you, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. So I mean, just in terms of that whole awareness thing, I think it's really important we do it now. I mean, it was always important that we did it, and I think organizations didn't always realize that, if you run an awareness campaign this year, you need to run it next year, and you need to run it the year after, and you need to think about those people who come into your organization 2 months after you've just run your awareness program. And it is something that we looked at, and we are very much looking to things like capture the flag as a great way to raise awareness in the organization, to grow some skills, to bring all of your non-techie people plus your techie people together into teams, and using gamification to sort of grow awareness, grow knowledge, and I suppose test their knowledge. And obviously, me as a non-techie, I'm going to get like easier questions, and they'll progress and get slightly, more difficult as I go through it. And somebody like Brian or Paul or Michael or Matthew on the call, they're going to get the harder questions because, they're the subject matter experts who,
we'll be able to answer them, Carmel.
That's the idea. But I think it's really critical that we do that. And it is part of that whole area where we talk about the skills gaps that, the non-techie people have the gaps in this area. We have to keep doing something around awareness. So definitely reach out to us if you're in that space and you're not doing something. And I suppose the other thing, and it goes back to Michael's point, that with SMEs across Ireland, I think if I haven't been hit, I'm probably not going to be hit. And sure, there are people with other organizations with deeper pockets that if a hacker goes after them, they're going to get more out of them than they're going to get out of my little 10, 20 person organization. But it's easier to hack a 10, 20 person organization, 10 of them, than it is to hack the organization that has 40,000 people in it or 3,000 people in it. So effectively, I think we need to be cognizant of that. Just because you haven't been hacked, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And I think we tend to be a little bit, unaware that there's lots of organizations every day. Apparently 63% more cyber attacks since COVID started than before. Right. So that's a big number that came out of the Information System Security Association late last year.
We've actually got a comment here from Geraldine, which kind of fits very neatly within this, and coming back to something that Brian was saying around phishing. She says, I had an unusually clever tempting phishing attack or text rather late last night, and it bothered me because it was so tempting to open it. So talking about an exhausted remote worker getting a text thinking this could work for me and open it, who do you alert now? So there's possibly a slight feeling of helplessness among people that, again, the over the partition sort of consultation of, did you get that? Or have a quick look at this. Does that look funny to you? So that sort of feeling of, on the one hand, isolation and perhaps not knowing what to do now, again, that sort of lack of procedural training. So thank you very much for that comment. But there's another comment here where, again, Anik is saying, don't try to secure environments you don't control. The only thing you can secure, because you do own it, is your own employees, not their laptops or phones. So is that a slightly narrow view of it, insofar as you can roll out clients to devices you don't entirely control and have sort of sandboxed areas? Brian, you're nodding there.
Yeah, and I'm sure Michael will back me up on this, that there's quite a lot of solutions out there that even if you're using, if people are using their own personal devices, you as the company or the person responsible for those systems and data, you can put solutions in place to put up virtual walled gardens around your environment. So, for example, you could deploy a mobile device management solution that could have containerized apps installed on people's devices, so that device, on that person's device, they can click on the icon for their email or the company application, but that any other system on or application on that device can't see into that container, and that container can't see out. So all you're doing from a company point of view is controlling that container. You can also create virtual desktops. So through a web browser, somebody can come into a virtual desktop, and then you have your corporate desktop in the cloud, and they click on it and they can work from there. So Annick's comment is quite right. As a company, you cannot enforce stuff on somebody's devices. Now, maybe bring on device policies. You can put controls in place to make sure a device is encrypted and has password protected. But, you can't access the device, you can't do stuff on it. So there are many solutions, and I'm sure Michael can speak much better than I can, but that's just a quick.
Okay, we'll get Michael to comment on that now, and then we'll come to Matthew and Paul on that one. So Michael, do you want?
Yeah, just a quick one on that. And I mean, I guess, listen, there's loads of technologies out there that can assist you, but I think just what we've seen, and this is really about over the last 12 months, people are it's working. Yes, people are using home devices, unknown infrastructure, but we're long enough down the line on this for some organizations who have addressed that and said, listen, do you know what? For the first couple of months, we couldn't get the laptops, we couldn't get out there, but we can deliver these to you now. Get them out there. So I don't think it's acceptable for somebody to say, listen, you keep running my business on your devices in your home with your stuff. Yeah, because people will do that. They'll do the best to keep the show on the road as employees. But organizations also need to bite the bullet and say, listen, I have this infrastructure. I have it sitting in the office. Let me reconfigure it, sort it out with these experts that are not doing anything else. Get it out there. So I think there's a bit of an onus on organizations to actually bite that bullet and sort that out. And then because if it's my laptop, I bought it for myself. Why should I have my employer looking what I'm doing? So yeah.
Okay. Matthew, do you want to come in on that, and then I'll come to you, Paul?
Yeah, so I think it's worth recognizing that the relationship between employers and employee has been completely changed in the last 12 months. And so to the point where the employee was essentially helping out the business at the beginning by using their own devices and putting customer or company data on their device. And to Michael's point, now I've had enough time to prepare everything, send them a secure laptop and so on. There's a couple of questions that come out of that. The first one is what am I doing with the data that's now left on the employee device? Because there's a leakage here and I need to recoup that data. And at some stage, ideally, I would want that person to bring the device into the office and then make sure that it's purged and so on. But am I going to break any kind of laws? Most likely, unless it's done via policy and so on. And I think we have that psychological impact of COVID-19. Big Brother is kind of throwing their tentacles everywhere. So now they have it into my personal devices. Now they want to know if I've had the vaccine, which one, when, how, why. And so we need to recognize that it's also an opportunity to redefine the way we communicate with employees. And we've always had discussions with the guys here at various conferences about the blur between personal life and business life on devices and with regards to data. And I think that's where there's an educational issue here. We need to go back to employees and say, all right, you know what? We understand, what antivirus is. We understand, what phishing is about. Now what we want to talk about is your actual usage. We've redefined the way we work. Let us help you redefine how you protect that new way of working. I think we have a duty to do that, and technology will help. Training will definitely help. There's a skills gap there. And then policies need to be put in place.
Okay, Paul, if I could get you very briefly on that, because we actually have a couple of questions there. I really want to get to
problem.
And then to go over to Carmel for a closeout on the educational side.
No problem. My first observation is Annick should be on the panel. Absolutely killer points being made there. Look, I'll try and sum it up really quickly. I mean, cyber awareness training, what's all that about? That's about affecting a cyber culture in an organization, which is usually driven from the top, driven from policies and procedures, and then you're making your people behave the way you want them to behave. Along comes COVID, throws it all up in the air. Now we all are operating differently. We have to reverse engineer the culture we're in now back to the policies, back to the infrastructure, back to the architecture, all of those things. So what we're all talking about here in Furious Agreement is we need to close the gap and realign between what is our new business model and what is our cyber risk status at this moment. So everybody in this call needs to go and do a cyber assessment, find out where the residual risks are, realign, and move forward. You can't put in technology without the right policies and procedures and everything in place. So it's time now to take a fresh look. There is no excuse about not closing these gaps, not sending out the new laptops, not doing those things. That excuse was a year ago, not today. You have to close all those gaps that have been identified. Remember that short-term goals, longer-term imperatives. We're all in the long game. We want to be running business in another year, 2 years, 3 years. So get your cyber risk right.
Very good. Okay. Well, just one comment that was made there. To Carmel's point, look at the recent ransomware attacks on the third level institutions in Dublin, and nobody saw that coming. So yeah, to many they may have been out of the blue. But we have a question here from John where he says, does the panel see the need for a cyber essentials type certification scheme in Ireland, given the huge importance of SMEs and their relative ignorance in the area of cyber risk management? So I think some work has already been done around that. So maybe Carmel, if you could address that one first.
Yeah, so I suppose around cyber risk management, as Paul mentioned earlier, we're partnering with ICTTF, and we provide 2 programs there. So the first is the Cyber Risk Officer program, which actually has Paul delivering the modules online in an online environment today. And the second program is the Cyber Risk Officer program, and that one is fully online, 90-day program without Paul. So you can choose the Paul version or the fully online 90-day program. I know which I want, what I could go for. There are those 2, and I would really advise it for anybody who is in a supervisory role in an organization, first, second line management, or right up at senior level in an organization. I think if you're making business decisions, you really need to understand the cyber risks that are there. And I think the other side of it is that businesses are so integrated now that really, if you don't bring the leaders across different parts of the business together, and if they're not attending a program like this, you're open. And I think it is really important to do that. So that certainly is our 2 offerings in that risk space.
Okay, thank you. There's another comment there from Ger. I agree with Michael. He said 12 months plus onwards, the laptop should be part of a hardware refresh. The desktop is dead in this scenario. Equip the user with a secure laptop, complete with the back-end supports, and stick a docking station on their office desk for when they eventually return. So I suppose it is a kind of a coming back to a comment Brian made, which I think put it succinctly, that the current situation is survivable but not sustainable. That the longer term has to account for the fact that it will be a hybrid environment, and not only will it be hybrid, but the delineations that you start with may not be the ones that persist. So thanks very much for that. But there is a question here from Sarah. She says, according to, and she cites Microsoft information, it says the education sector is the most affected industry with 63% of reported malware encounters. Have you any comments re the education sector? So again, with the earlier comment about the ransomware attacks on Irish institutions, has the education sector been particularly targeted?
Yeah, I think, Paul, just from my work with Europol, etc., a key thing people need to understand is cyber criminals aren't the cuddly geeks that we see depicted in the movies. These are criminals. They're hardened criminals. These are the Kinahan type people who will shoot you in the blink of an eye for the price of a packet of cigarettes. That's how bad these people are. And they see education facilities and, as Matthew identified, health facilities as an easy target in COVID-19 because everybody's had to move to remote environments to facilitate the services. So schools and colleges had to go remote in order to teach their students. Therefore, they're probably more like, and they've always been badly funded. So their security has hasn't been as good as corporate clients. And thirdly, they're very open environments because of the very nature of them. They're universities. The whole thing is to share information. It's not to lock information up. So they're much easier targets for criminals to go for, and they feel they're they're easy victims because they're probably more likely to pay the ransom to get their systems back in order that they can continue teaching their students. So, we need to get around this image of cyber criminals being the cuddly Hollywood hackers. They're not. And look at your risk profile based on that as well.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, we're coming very close to time. And as I said, I want to round off with Carmel in terms of the educational perspective. So if I could ask each of you for just a very brief comment in terms of a round out, in terms of maybe just a little piece of advice in terms of what to do, or perhaps an area to watch out for. So maybe, Paul, do you want to start?
Sure, no problem. I mean, I would say that it's time to take a fresh, holistic look at your cyber risk framework right across the business, from procurement, governance oversight of your larger organization, all the controls. Make sure that it's aligned with what your new business model is effectively, because it wasn't the same as it was when we were in lockdown 1. And then start addressing those gaps, prioritize them, and start closing those gaps off.
Okay, Matthew?
So I think you need to look at what we refer to as the 5 pillars of security for your business. So physical security, people, data, infrastructure in the wider sense of it, including remote workers and subsidiaries and so on. And crisis management, what do you do when something goes wrong? And that's a good start to understand where you are and take the right action points.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Yeah, I really echo Matthew and Paul's comments. It's about finding out where you are and about finding out where you need to be for 12, 24 months out. There's no point in just looking at where you were. And there's no point in throwing money out there till you work out what it is you need to do.
Okay, Brian.
And I think just to wrap it all up, I agree strongly with everything that Paul, Matthew and Michael have said. But I think now is the time to realize we're not going to go back to the way we were. So we need to start planning for the way we're going to be. And it's going to be a mix of remote, hybrid, and on-site. And as Paula says, identify the threats and the risks to your business on that, as Matthew says, in those different pillars. And I'm sure Michael will be happy for me to say, and open the purse strings to make sure it happens.
Very good. Yes, and an important point. And we've just had a comment there from David as well, referring to what Carmel had said in terms of cyber essentials and covering that cyber risk. And he said, surely we need this backed by government and promoted to smaller businesses in particular. So that segues nicely into your area, Carmel, and in terms of planning for those future needs and meeting current needs. So can you just kind of talk a little bit more again, maybe stemming from those essentials and going into the specifics in terms of the kinds of educations, kinds of educational courses that are being put in place for existing security professionals, and then bringing along the new generation?
Sure, yeah. So, and I might just address that comment that came in first, in the sense that Cyber Ireland produced a skills and Irish skills, cyber skills report the start of this year, which basically talks about skills shortages and skills gaps. And one of the things that you will find on their website, and it is to talk to the whole government thing, is that there is a cyber skills project that has been launched towards the end of last year, which involves industry, research entities and international and national academic institutions, and it's an 8.1 million investment under the Higher Education Authority, and it's part of their Human Capital Initiative pillar. So that, just to let that gentleman that asked the question or made that comment know that there are things happening, and the government is sponsoring things, and obviously the NCSC's report also does talk to the need to address skills. So then, looking at what we're doing as ICT Skillnet in terms of addressing the skills, I've kind of mentioned the skills gaps, and we've talked about Capture the Flag. If anybody is interested in that, the person to contact is david.fitzgerald@ictskillnet.ie. And David certainly will be happy to talk to any organisation that wants to try and bridge some of that awareness gap. We've talked about the cyber risk with ICTTF and Paul's organisation. Again, reach out to us. Those programs are running. I suppose then, when we look at those who are maybe maybe in technical roles today and are looking towards a career in cybersecurity or moving into that area, we do have an MSc in cybersecurity, which is a level 9 program. And again, it's fully online. And again, reach out to us. This is something that if you're either in the space and want to move into it, it's very useful for somebody who's already in a technical role. And I suppose the other thing to say is that all of our technical master's programs have some element of cybersecurity, some modules of cybersecurity in there. So you do get a flavor of it if you do an undergraduate or if you do another master's, for example. The other thing that we're doing is very much looking at those who've been displaced by COVID. So we have a Future in Tech program, which has 8 career roles within it. And one of them is a cybersecurity analyst. So this is a 12-month program. It's free of charge. And it is for those who are unemployed and may have been displaced by COVID. So our first cohort of people have such an interesting range of students on that program. It has a professional industry mentors on it, and they do a project. It is all online at the moment, obviously because of COVID, but a great way for those who are trying to get into the space and maybe looking for that new career to look at that particular option.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, unfortunately, we're very much out of time. We've hit our hour. So I think the summation of all of the situation today is that even though we are in a new environment and there are new threats, that the old wisdom applied to the new situation should still reveal what needs to be done. And as Brian has said, that sometimes requires opening the purse strings. So the indication is clear. But thank you very much to everybody for your contributions today. Thank you, Carmel, Brian, Michael, Matthew, and Paul. Thank you very much to our audience. Some great comments and questions there, and thankfully we got to all of them. So hopefully that's given you a very good overview of the current cybersecurity situation and indicators for what may need attention for you. So thank you very much to everyone for attending, to everybody for contributing, to our producer Sarah for hosting us all, and we'll hopefully see you at another Lockdown Your Learning session in the near future. So thank you very much to everybody, and have a good day.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this webinar, please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to be kept up to date with all our news, events and programs. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this one.